So I'll just run through a few housekeeping rules initially, and then I'll introduce you to our speaker. So if you're not speaking, please could you keep your microphone on mute, as it does cause interference on occasion. To note, we are recording this session. So there are some colleagues that haven't been able to make the session, so we are recording it for their benefit and also for yourselves. We will make the recording accessible to everybody after the session. And also we have the chat function running there. So any questions that you have, we'll be happy to answer at the end. So if you can please use that chat function and we'll get around to any questions that you have. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker, who is Fiona Inston. Fiona is the Head of Public Protection at Lancaster City Council. So welcome, Fiona. Thank you for joining us, and I'll hand over to you.
Brilliant, thank you. Morning, everybody. So thank you very much for the introduction. So I'm just going to give an overview really around environmental health. So to start with, before I go into some of the remit of environmental health, because we can always talk about what we do and how we do it, but actually what is most important is about why we do it. So a lot of what we do is protecting the public and improving lives. And what you'll see is from the, we talk through the presentation around the different ways in which we touch many of the population and people's health. So the remit of environmental health, I don't know, you can describe it as it's into a number of disciplines. So we've got the public health work. So at the moment, very important with COVID around infection control. We've got our housing work that we do in terms of private sector housing, HMOs, so that's houses of multiple occupation, living conditions in the private sector, energy efficiency, housing plates with landlords, etc. We've got our health and safety aspects that we do as well, so accident investigations, work standards in workplace, and then we also have environmental protection. So that can cover a whole range of things from statutory nuisance, filthy and verminous premises, public funerals, fly tipping, the whole range under that area. And then we have food hygiene, which predominantly will be known by most people where we work with businesses in terms of food safety compliance. So that's an overview of environmental health, but also depending on which organisation, there's also at times licensing, so the taxi, the liquor trade, gambling, etc., and also other areas which we might talk on later on. So if you go over to the next slide then, Stuart, that'd be great. Just where he goes on. Yeah. You can click on to the next one. So we're just waiting for the slide to come. Here we go. Da-da. So obviously what I just talked about that is around the importance of environmental health. And so for me, the key bit is talking about the main determinants of health and how, if you can see in the slide, there's a lot of work that environmental health does that fits into that health model. So if it's regarding making sure that the air that we breathe is clean, in terms of providing community safety, in terms of helping support local employment, so there's good quality employment in the local economy. It fits across all of those areas. And I don't know if maybe at a later stage just pausing and having a look at how you can see how environmental health covers a whole range of those areas. But yeah, for me, that's kind of some of the fundamentals of what we do. So it's all focused around how we improve people's health. So if you go on to the next slide, please. So this is really typical for anybody working in environmental health. I think most people recognise that no 2 days the same. You go in, you might have a plan of work, but you have to be completely dynamic in terms of what is the priority for that day. And that's always been the case in environmental health. I think at the moment, when we're talking about that in a minute about COVID, I think there's much more balls up in the air. Some of the work we've always had to do is around that prioritisation and recognising that if a food poisoning outbreak comes in, there's a fatality, or we get pulled in many directions. So as a workforce, we're really diverse, but that means we're always thinking on our feet and can have to be very creative about problem solving, etc. So I think that kind of shows some of the skill sets that the profession has, that how they then continue and support businesses and communities very much around kind of a refocus continually around those prioritizations. So if we go over to the next slide, I was just going to talk a little bit around the techniques that we use. So effectively, as our ultimate game is to get compliance and support businesses. So how do we get around that? So obviously we've got the regulations, which we have, but it's a staged enforcement approach. So we pretty much work with businesses, but how do we ensure compliance? So a lot around the behavioural insight about what does it mean for a business to comply? How do we help them comply and get to those kind of the end result without having to use regulations and take reviews and people's licenses? So although it's kind of that carrot and stick approach, so recognising that we have got a stick when we require it, but we much more prefer to work with businesses to ensure that compliance. So there's a whole range of toolkits that we use to achieve that. So if you go to the next slide. So so obviously in the middle of a pandemic, it's probably useful just to talk about COVID-19. It's as a profession, it's probably worth saying that normally we are really busy, hardworking, and we just kind of get down and head down. At the moment, the work that environmental health does closely with our public health and colleagues is in the spotlight. So continually having to think on our feet, guidance is coming out, the speed of what we're having to deal with in the detail is probably not something I've experienced in my career. And I suppose in terms of what that means in terms of environmental health, we've been out doing significant amount of visits, supporting businesses, fielding complaints and concerns from members of the public, helping local decision makers in terms of our public health expertise. How do we influence some of the behavioural changes around hand washing and public, some of our very basic public health messages? So at the moment, it is requiring a lot of people to think on their feet, go into areas that they've never been in before. So how do you get around food hygiene inspections if you aren't going into the premises? How are we communicating with businesses in a very different way? So that's quite complete dynamics in terms of changing our way of how we think. But also what I found is personally is we've been working even closer with businesses during COVID. We've got a common goal around protecting the public. So in terms of our partnership approach and working with people like the BID, so business improvement districts and trade groups, that has effectively just brought us all together, and in terms of our statutory partners as well. So the challenges with COVID will continue to, I think, bring the regulators and businesses much closer together. And there's lots of opportunities in terms of how do we take that forward. So if we go on to the next slide. So it's probably useful, in terms of a kind of a SWOT kind of think about where we are. So in terms of strengths, so where there's a significant amount of highly professional, focused people in local government that are here to improve lives and support businesses, and are extremely passionate. So, and what we've got at the moment is that profile of that workforce being promoted further. because when we talk about some of our threats coming down the line around budget pressures, though obviously we always have in local government the question around budget. So I think at the moment in our profile with elected members, with MPs and others, is absolutely being key in terms of actually what does the future look like for environmental health? What is our career progression programme? How are we helping to diversify some of the tasks across the organisation? So in terms of, you know, the effectively, I suppose, is it versus a weakness for that is to often when we're head down, so busy doing what we do and love, that that profile goes down. So in terms of the challenges for the profession is how do we work with partners to continue to maintain that profile. So in terms of, you know, opportunities, it's all around, you know, what have we learned from COVID, what have we worked differently, and how do we go forward into the future, looking at how we change some of our current ways, how we deliver statutory services so they're more modernised, customer focused. How do we take and allow professional officers to you know, get the best out of what they can do? And obviously the key, you know, in terms of the threat will be in terms of from a regulator's point of view is where businesses will be under significant pressure for you know, financial pressure. You know, a lot of pubs are significantly having the impact of the 10 o'clock closure, reduction of customers. It's quite common that there may be short people cutting corners with regulation. So how do we ensure that we protect the public, but also support businesses through this really challenging times where they will be getting less income and, you know, they've got additional expenditure. So next slide, please, Stuart. So yeah, so in the midst of this, and we begin at the beginning of the call, I was just talking with Jackie around Brexit actually as well, because it is impacting a number of our workload. So in the middle of a pandemic, it's also worthwhile to say, in terms of a regulator's point of view, we've also got the challenge of imports and exports, and what does that mean for our local businesses? And for those, you know, for our own authority, we have got port, so we've got port changes going on at the same time. So it's, you know, it's going back to those juggling balls. So in the middle of a pandemic, we've also got Brexit to be planning for, and, you know, and we'll just watch this space on how the next few months go with Brexit. So next slide, please, Stuart. Yeah, so I think when you talk about environmental health, I quite like this slide because I thought actually most people when they go into a career, you can go and get your qualification, and that's, you know, that's a tick in the box and you meet the job description. But actually it's about the attitudes, the knowledge, the behaviour, those deep values that are within the profession about how do we work in innovation projects, be customer focused, and what draws people to remain in the public services and to protect people, because some of the challenges that we have in the profession is people either leaving environmental health or likewise going into the private sector, where often the pay may be, you know, there may be pay incentives, etc. So how do we continue to motivate a workforce around, you know, I think, you know, it says on the diagram, you know, why am I here, and making sure that we continue to kind of improve people's health and recognise the benefit that we're doing by evaluating what we do continually. So the next slide then, Stuart. Fantastic. So I think I've alluded to this about partnership working. So, you know, as a profession, we work significantly with a number of partners, and I tried scribbling down some before and I'd kind of run out of space. But in terms of our strength as a profession, we are recognised and valued by a number of partners. So if you think some of our key partners around the police and our community safety partnership, we've got elected members who are key advocates of environmental health. We've got educational settings, and first we've got a university that we work closely with. Closely at the moment is a lot of work with our blue light services through our local resilience forum linked to the pandemic, and we will go back into local resilience forum work every time we go into emergency mode. So if there's when there's a flooding incident or different scenarios, we go back into them types of scenarios. We've got our county council for those who are two-tier. Doesn't apply for those in a unitary authority, because that then is partnership working within the same organisations. We've got our obviously the growth hub, our business improvement districts, and a lot of work with our sectors. So for the moment, we're doing a significant amount of work with our pub watch to support the hospitality industry. And but also key to that is also our partnership working with the community and our clinical conditioning Ps and health and wellbeing forums about how do we all collectively focus on improving health. So next slide then, please, Stuart. So yeah, think green. So in the midst of all of this as well, the profession and local government really many years ago used to talk about local agenda 21, and it was flavour of the month, and then it went fairly quiet. And in the last year or so, there's been a significant focus around carbon and climate emergencies being declared by local authorities. So the green agenda is definitely back up high on the agenda. And the same principles really in terms of environmental health. Effectively, a lot of this is business as usual for us. We've always been interested in air quality, reducing emissions, electric charging points, about the use of active travel to reduce the use of town centre and use of park and rides, etc. So for us, that a green agenda has always been there. We work with private rented landlords around energy efficiency and how can we promote the reduction of single plastic, so we stop kind of move on that agenda. So I think that's just useful, but also that sustainability we do is trying to help we can do with businesses around that sustainability as well. So the next slide, please. So yeah, so for us in terms of the key really is that diversification. So there's a number of businesses here. Some of the principles of what we do will apply for a whole range of businesses, but as a profession, it's thinking on our feet about actually what is the issue in the various premises that are very different, and that engagement, and a lot of it is around real effective listening skills, being really observant and providing that support and signposting, and recognizing that it's not a one size fits all. Each one of those businesses will present different challenges to a regulator. So how do we continue to support a whole range of sector? And then the next slide, please. Yeah, so I think when you talk about the future, it's a really, really interesting one, because the future has changed over the last 6 months. I think most regulators were pretty clear around where we was moving towards. At the moment, we're going to be challenged with the recovery of post-COVID. We're going to be, the impact it's had on communities, on people's mental health, the impact it's had on our own workforce. As a profession, it's fair to say we have been at the forefront of this. I think most officers have probably been working significantly long hours for the last 6 months, and now we're now hitting the second wave. So in terms of the future, it's around how do we support as a profession a thriving and prosperous economy, and how do we work closely with our community. So rather than it's done to the community, we work together on kind of co-creating, co-produce. So it's not done for them, it's done with them. It's around that kind of clean, green and safe neighbourhoods and how we wider fit into that contribution. And also really important is that our communities are happy and they're healthy, and we kind of deliver and change our dynamics of how we deliver our services to fit into the modern ways. So how do we modernize how customers contact the service, so it's not just 9 to 5? How can people report issues? How can people self kind of drive forward in the future? So I think I'm going to quick look. I think that was my last slide. So I think now at this point I'm happy just to take any questions. And I'll have a quick scan. I know there was one on the chat box. I'll have a quick scan what that one is. So do you want me to read it out? I'm not sure if everyone gets the
Yeah, if you want to go ahead, Fiona.
Yeah. It was about, so I mentioned the COVID has resulted in the regulators working more with businesses to protect the public. Do you have any thoughts on whether and how you would like environmental professionals to try to maintain these higher levels of engagement? Yeah, so it's a really key one for us. I suppose for us, what we've got now is the challenge that we really upped our game. I think the call I had this morning with our chair of our portfolio for economic development is the businesses are singing our praises. So it's actually now, how do we maintain that kind of working relationship we've done with them? I suspect we'll be doing much more focused sector work, have more availability. So we've been doing some Q&A sessions with businesses, frequently asked questions, holding online web seminars. We've been mail shotting them. At the moment, we've just launched, actually today, a COVID safe accreditation. So if a business is able to demonstrate to us they're got COVID secure, we're going out and assessing and giving out awards so that they can promote to businesses and to the public, basically give them confidence that they are serious about regulations. That gives a QR code. I mean, there's QR codes bizarre at the moment everywhere. That also gives a QR code, which we did before the national one, where the public can feedback their concerns. So rather than going to kind of a TripAdvisor type scenario where it'll come back into the districts and we can have a look at what the feedback is. How do we support some of those businesses? So I think, and we've already started now meeting with our business improvement districts now monthly. So we've scheduled those meetings in place. We're looking at how we can possibly so looking at the challenges in terms of our city centre. Some of it is around rough sleepers, some of it is around ASB, about people not feeling safe. So how do we look at wider about how we support that kind of business community? So I think the challenges are really, I suppose, is how do we maintain now what we've kind of developed, which I think would be absolutely key. So I think now we'll be regular members now of Pub Watch. We never used to really go. We used to leave it to the police. So and I think we'll probably be looking at a business support type officer. So it's a non-regulator to kind of to bring that feedback back into the team. And also key would be for us is working closely with our economic development colleagues. So within our own organisation and with the county council's business, the business growth, how do we work even closer and join? So yeah, that's some of the challenges that we'll have. But how do we just make that happen, really?
That's great, thank you, Fiona. So there's a question just coming from Teresa. Excuse me. You mentioned about using behavioural insights and giving messages to businesses. Can you give any examples of how you've used these?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're really interested in behavioural insight, I know there's a fantastic AHO at Preston who can give you a lot more detail about it. But I suppose it's rather than just talking about the kind of carrot and stick approach, it's talking about with the business. Okay, so what does compliance look like to you? And and it effectively it's using some of what the NLP, so neuro-linguistic programming type style, about how do you just change the behaviour. So actually not just saying, yeah, Simon, neighbour from Preston, who's I was thinking of. So it's so rather than just saying, well, okay, well, we want you to just do this, and they go, okay, well, they don't understand it. It's just a very different approach. I mean, sometimes it will take a little bit longer, and I suppose it's similar to how we manage our team. So rather than just saying, okay, I want you to get on with that, it's actually that kind of getting that buy-in, explaining what needs to be done, they taking ownership. So it very much follows the principles in terms of how to be a good leadership model as well. So it's and if people are interested, I suggest to definitely speak with Simon. I'm sure he will happily give you some real detailed insight because he's does a lot of training on it as well.
Brilliant, that's great. Is there any further questions for Fiona?
Yeah, the only thing I would say, I should say really, is I've been around the country to many areas. I trained in the Northwest and in Salford and learn a significant amount from being at the coalface in terms of dealing with premises that are really struggling. It's give me a really good insight about how do regulators work very differently. I've been at very affluent local authorities in terms of districts where we've had very different challenges. So a lot of the work that we do is just really understanding the business sector and adapting your approach and understanding the pressures that they're facing. And then the pressure, in different sectors and different areas where they're likely to be areas of non-compliance. So you can just try and encourage them not to be going in that kind of direction, but being really mindful of those, that kind of the pressures that they're under as well.
Okay, so Teresa's asked about the business compliance officer post, and she's sort of saying that is a great idea. And yesterday they also discussed it in one of the sessions. I'm not sure if you was aware of that. So I think it's an approach that a number of authorities are looking at taking.
Yeah, we've had some, because we struggle to recruit EHOs as well. We've got a number of business compliance officers, and in COVID they have been doing fantastic work, really, and well, the ones we've had have come from business sectors, so they've just got a very different view. So they've been in catering businesses, etc. So they understand it from the other side as well. So it gives a really good mixture into the team. And gives their experience and their insight. So we get a real blend of the regulator, but also practically what does that mean for businesses on the ground?
Yeah, absolutely. So Jackie did mention there about other regulators in her comments. So she's put, you've made great inroads in engaging with partners to support businesses. Have you got any tips for other regulators? So have you sort of worked with other regulators? You've mentioned Pub Watch and a few of the other sort of local ones. What have you worked with, any national regulators or?
Yeah, so we're working closely with Trading Standards. So our Trading Standards department are within the county council, and they service 14 districts. So we work closely with them. Our other regulators that we're working closely with, and I suppose in effect COVID has brought us closer together. So although it's been a hell of a time, it also has created some really good opportunities. So we're working really closely with our fire colleagues as well, and police. So when we talk about our COVID visits, we've trained up a lot of police officers that now go in and can make some kind of an assessment about how safe a business is. So yeah, we work side by side with the police at the moment. So and we're now looking at the specials are being trained up, and the same could happen with fire. So it's how do we become the wider eyes and the ears really. And the next thing is getting more of our elected members involved, because they are visiting businesses and they're here, they're really keen to support businesses, but at the same time a balance of keeping the public safe.
Brilliant, that's great. Thank you, Fiona. So we have reached 10:30, so I know that some people will have other calls and meetings to attend to. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you, Fiona. There is one further questions come in, if you do have a couple of minutes extra to spare. Have you thought about working with your growth hub?
Yeah, so we are doing some work with our growth hub, and that work will continue. I think COVID just has absorbed all our time, and I think now we're looking at doing some work around. So we've been supporting businesses at a district level, but actually, how do we support them across the county, which hopefully will take some of the local pressure off some of the local teams. So yeah, we're having those discussions with the growth hub about how do we scale some of our business support up across the county. But yeah, I think it's just timing, isn't it? I think it's just at the moment, and I think in terms of our recovery planning for public protection, it's actually we'll be looking at actually what's worked really well and what do we want to do more of, and working with businesses and the growth hub is definitely on the top of, you know, and how do we get more around the partnership working will be definitely high on the agenda. So how do we drive that forward is key. So yeah, so Andrew Lehman, I've had lots of discussions with Andrew. So and you know he's been really good support for us as well.
Right.
Well, thank you very much anyway. And I think, you know, I'm happy if anyone has any questions afterwards, they can contact me. You can share my details if you know who wish.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you for your time. Thank you everyone for your questions. And I hope that you can all join some of the other sessions which are taking place this afternoon and tomorrow as well, and Friday. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks
you,
a lot.
Fiona.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.